1887, Arizona Territory. The sun was a hard white fire above the desert, and the air shimmered like ghosts dancing off the road. Caleb Mercer sat high on the driver's bench of his covered wagon, reins loose in one hand, the other resting near the holster strapped to his thigh. The wagon creaked under the weight of supplies: flour, oats, salt pork, some bolts of cloth he intended to trade in town. He wasn't in a hurry. There was no one waiting for him but dust and old memories. He hadn't spoken to another soul in 5 days. That's the kind of silence a man learns to live without here. He was somewhere between Benson and Bisbee, heading southwest along the stretch of dirt trail that curved near the dry riverbed locals called Bone Creek. The name came from the cattle that died trying to drink there. All that remained were bleached rib cages and brittle horns sunken into cracked mud. As the horses slowed, snorting and tugging against the reins, Caleb pulled them to a stop near the riverbed's edge. He climbed down with the weariness of a man who'd worn the same boots across too many miles. The canteen on his hip sloshed with the last of the clean water. He crouched near the riverbed, scooped some damp dirt into his palm, and let it fall back like useless ash. That's when he heard the click. It wasn't loud, just a tiny metallic tick behind him. But out here it was as good as a thunderclap. Caleb didn't turn. He didn't reach for his gun. He just straightened slowly, his back to the voice that came next. "Don't move." Female. Young. Trembling. "I said don't move." He raised his hands slightly. "I'm not. I want your rifle, your supplies, and your horses." Still not turning, Caleb said. "A little bold for a hot afternoon, don't you think?" "Shut up," she snapped. "I don't want to hurt you." Her voice cracked near the end. Caleb turned his head just slightly. "You already made the mistake of pointing that at a man who's got nothing left to lose." "Then that makes two of us," she replied. He turned slowly to face her. She wasn't much older than 20. Slim, sharp-eyed, with sun-darkened skin and a revolver shaking in both hands. She wore a dusty hat pulled low over her brow, and her shirt looked like it once belonged to a man twice her size. Her boots didn't match. Her jaw was tight, but her lips trembled. "You're hungry," Caleb said. "That why you're doing this? Don't talk. Get back in the wagon." Like this story so far? If it's pulling at something in your chest, or if you just love a good Wild West mystery, go ahead and like this video, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss the next chapter. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories ride. Now back to the tale. He walked slowly, careful not to spook her. He hoisted himself back into the seat and sat still. She followed, circling to the rear of the wagon, the gun still raised. He could hear her rummaging, first for the rifle, then for the food. He didn't stop her. He didn't say a word. She emerged a minute later with a sack over her shoulder and the rifle in her hand. Her eyes darted to the horses, then to the canteen at his hip. "You want the water?" he asked. She nodded. He unhooked the canteen, held it out gently. She snatched it and stepped back fast, like she'd been burned. Caleb studied her in silence. There was something strange in her eyes. Anger, yes, but something underneath. Not greed, not cruelty, grief. As she turned to leave, he said, "You forgot one thing." She froze mid-step. "What?" "My last name." She turned back slowly, the sack hanging heavy off her shoulder. "What?" He looked her in the eyes. "Mercer. Caleb Mercer." It hit her like a shotgun blast. The sack dropped to the ground. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The revolver slipped from her hand and thudded into the dirt. "No," she whispered. "No, no." Caleb stared at her. "Rosa." She backed away like she was about to fall off the edge of the earth. "You're dead. You died. I saw the house. They said you—" "I didn't die," he said quietly. "You did. That's what they told me. That they took you. That I'd never see you again." Tears sprang to her eyes, fast and violent, and she wiped at them like she was ashamed of them. She bent, grabbed her sack, and turned. "Rosa, don't follow me," she screamed. "Don't. Just stay away." Then she ran. the sack hitched over her shoulder, the canteen slapping against her hip. She disappeared over the ridge without looking back. Caleb didn't chase her. He just sat on the wagon bench, staring at the place she'd been. His heart pounded like a war drum in his chest. 10 years. 10 long, silent years. And his baby sister had just tried to rob him. He didn't sleep that night, just sat beside a low fire, staring into the flames like they held the answers to every wrong turn that had led him here. The moon was high and pale, and coyotes howled in the far hills. He remembered the night the house burned. He was 24. Rosa had just turned 12. Bandits or raiders, no one ever found out who, descended on the ranch after sunset. They set the barn alight and came for the house with torches and pistols. Caleb had killed 2 of them before he was shot through the shoulder and dragged away by neighbors who saw the smoke. Rosa was gone. No one found a body, just blood on the porch and a scrap of her dress caught on the fence. For 10 years he'd dreamed of finding her, of burying her, of forgetting her, but she was alive, and she was broken. He stared at the revolver she'd dropped. It sat beside his bedroll, cold and heavy. Her initials were scratched into the side, RL, the same way she used to carve her name into tree trunks. He hadn't seen those letters in a decade. The next morning, he turned the wagon around. He didn't go to Bisbee, didn't go to town at all. He headed back toward Bone Creek. He had no map, no trail, no promise she'd return. But blood was blood, and he'd waited too damn long already. 3 days passed. Each morning, he parked the wagon near the same ridge she'd disappeared over. He'd sit there with coffee and stare into the distance. Sometimes he thought he saw her shadow. Sometimes he thought he was losing his mind. Then on the 4th morning, she came back. She stood at the top of the ridge, just as the sun rose. Arms crossed, hat low, that same wild fire behind her eyes. "You waited," she said. "I would have waited 10 more." Rosa stepped forward, slow. Every movement was cautious, like a deer raised under the sound of gunfire. She sat on the edge of the wagon's wheel, not looking at him. "I didn't mean to do it. I know. I didn't know it was you. I figured." Silence stretched like wire between them. Finally, she said, "They took me. After the fire. The ones who said it. Sold me to a trader outside Nogales. I ran. Got picked up by someone else. You ever hear of a woman called Dusty N?" Caleb's jaw tightened. Bounty hunter turned thief. Ran with the Dugan gang. "She raised me," Rosa said. "Taught me to lie, steal, fight." "She teach you to pull a gun on family?" Rosa's lip quivered. She looked away. "No," she whispered. "I taught myself that." Caleb sighed, his voice softer. "You didn't come back for food." "No," she admitted. "I came to see if I imagined you. I've imagined you a lot. I've imagined you every day since the fire." Rosa finally looked up at him. Her eyes were glassy, rimmed red with dust and shame. "I don't know who I am anymore. You're my sister," he said. "That's all that matters." She shook her head. "You don't know the things I've done." He reached out, slowly, and placed her old revolver in her lap. "You dropped this," he said. She stared at it, then burst into tears. Caleb didn't say another word. He just pulled her into his arms and held her as she cried like a child who'd been lost too long in the dark. They sat like that for a long time, under the rising sun, beneath the broken silence, in the place where a family, torn apart by fire and fate, found its first breath of hope again. The wind came hard off the plains that night, dry and bitter, like it was trying to scrub the world clean of old sins. Caleb stood by the corral, arms folded against the cold, watching the moon hang low over the hills. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. He didn't turn. Rosa stepped out barefoot, wrapped in a quilt she'd found folded in the trunk at the foot of his bed. It had been their mother's, patched in places, the edges frayed. She said nothing, just leaned against the porch post and stared at the stars like she was trying to memorize them. It had been 3 days since she came back. 3 days of strange silences and stiff movements, like neither one of them knew how to say what needed saying. "You still don't lock your door," she finally said. Nothing out here worth taking, Caleb replied. A pause. Then her voice came softer, cracked like old glass. I used to pick that lock with a hairpin when I wanted to sneak cookies after bedtime. Caleb smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed fixed on the dark. I remember. She stepped down into the dirt, her feet making no sound. How long did you think I was dead? 10 years, he said. Longer than you were alive before you disappeared. Rosa wrapped the quilt tighter around her shoulders and walked to stand beside him. And you never left Arizona? Never stopped looking? I left, he said quietly. For a while. Rode with a couple of search parties. Talked to bounty men. Rode down south nearly to Sonora. But everything led to a dead end. Then I came back and started over. This land used to belong to the old ranch. Figured I'd rebuild. Figured. If you were alive, you might come back someday. Her voice broke. Why? Because that's what family does. She turned to face him then, eyes red but dry. That ain't what it felt like all these years. I don't know what I am now, Caleb. Not really. They gave me names. Dusty and called me Rue, like I was her pet. The Dugan gang just called me Girl. Men I stole from called me worse. But I don't know who Rosa Mercer is anymore. You'll remember, he said. You just forgot for a while. No, she whispered. She died in that fire. Caleb finally turned to look at her. She didn't. She just got lost. She looked like she might argue, might cry again. But instead, she just sat down in the dirt, legs tucked under her, arms still wrapped tight in the quilt. She stared at the corral like it held some answer she couldn't find. After a moment, she said, You ever kill a man? Caleb hesitated. Yes. Her voice dropped low. How many? 3, he said. 1 during the war. 1 the night of the fire. 1 protecting a woman outside of Bowie. She nodded slowly. I've killed 6. He didn't flinch, didn't judge, just stood there and let the silence stretch out again. They weren't good men, she added. Most were trying to hurt me. 1 was just in the way. You did what you had to, Caleb said. That's what Dusty used to say. Her eyes narrowed. But she didn't believe in mercy, just survival. She raised you, more like she owned me, pulled me out of a trading camp near the border, said I was useful, taught me to shoot pickpockets, lie. She made me believe the only way to live was to be faster, colder, meaner. And you believed her? I had to. There was no one else. She looked up at him then, searching his face like it held a truth she didn't know how to ask for. Why didn't you forget about me? Caleb swallowed hard. I never buried you. Never had a body to put in the ground. Just that blood on the porch. And every time I saw a girl on the trail, or in a crowd, I wondered if it was you. I told myself if I stopped looking, that meant you were really gone. Rosa closed her eyes. The wind blew her hair across her face, and for a moment, she looked like the child he used to chase around the yard, barefoot and wild and full of stories about becoming a gunslinger or riding with Annie Oakley. I used to dream about you, she said, in the dark, after Dusty passed out from whiskey and the men left. I used to imagine you'd find me, but after a while, it got harder to remember your face. Caleb knelt beside her and took her hand, rough and scarred though it was. I'm right here. She gripped his fingers like a lifeline. That night, she slept inside the cabin for the first time, in the small room that had once been theirs. The bed still creaked the same way, and the window still faced east, where the sun came up over the mountains like fire. Caleb stood outside her door a long time, just listening to her breathe. The next morning, trouble arrived. It came in the shape of a rider, tall, thin, wrapped in a black duster. He rode a pale horse and carried a long rifle across his back. His face was leathery, with a scar across his chin and a gold tooth that caught the sun when he grinned. Caleb saw him before he reached the ranch, through the spyglass he kept by the porch. 1 rider meant a scout. More would follow. He set down the glass and stepped off the porch. Rosa was feeding the chickens, still wearing her quilt. She saw the look on his face and dropped the feed tin. Who is it? Don't know, he said. But he's not here for me. She froze. He found me. Caleb moved fast. Inside. Now. They stepped into the cabin. He checked his rifle, laid 2 pistols on the table, and pulled a second one from a hidden drawer in the floorboards. Rosa watched him like she didn't know whether to cry or run. You know who it is, don't you? He asked. She nodded slowly. Silas Crow. He was Dusty Ann's man before she died. When I left the gang, he said he'd find me. Said I owed him blood. You ride with outlaws, you make enemies, Caleb said. I didn't ride, she snapped. I was dragged. He met her eyes. Then let's end it. When the rider reached the ranch, he didn't dismount. Just sat tall in the saddle, grinning with the kind of confidence that came from knowing there were more men waiting beyond the ridge. Morning, he called. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. That depends. Just looking for someone. Aren't we all? Silas tilted his head. Woman. Short. Mean. Pretty when she ain't scowling. She don't live here. Silas chuckled. That right? Funny. 'Cause I tracked her prints halfway up the valley. And we both know Rosa Lane walks like a cat in a wolf den. Caleb didn't move. What do you want? She took something that wasn't hers. Left before finishing a job. And she killed 2 of my men. She ain't part of your world anymore. Silas leaned forward in the saddle. That's where you're wrong, friend. You don't just walk out on me. Not without leaving something behind. Then maybe I ought to leave you something now. The threat hung between them like gunpowder in the air. Silas just grinned. You've got till sundown, he said. Then I come back with fire. He turned and rode off, his horse kicking up dirt behind him. Rosa appeared behind Caleb on the porch, trembling. I won't let you get killed for me. Too late, he said. She stared up at him. I don't want to run anymore. Then don't. He handed her a pistol. Her hand closed around it slowly, like it weighed more than it ever had before. That afternoon they built barricades, moved the wagon in front of the barn, piled crates by the windows and nailed old shutters across the doors. Caleb set up the repeater rifle on the porch, while Rosa laid out bullets like she was folding laundry. By the time the sun touched the tops of the mountains, they were ready. 5 riders appeared at the ridge. Caleb and Rosa stood side by side behind the corral fence, rifles raised. When the first shot rang out, it wasn't from Silas. It was Rosa, straight through the chest of a man riding toward them, sending him spinning off his horse. The others charged. Gunfire lit up the twilight, sharp and wild. Caleb took down one, then another. Bullets cracked through the air, splintered wood, tore through crates. Rosa screamed as a bullet grazed her arm, but didn't fall. She kept shooting. By the time it ended, the last man standing was Silas, bleeding from the shoulder, crawling through the dust. Rosa walked toward him slowly, pistol in hand. He looked up at her, blood in his teeth. You think this makes you clean? No, she said, but it makes me free. She pulled the trigger. The desert went quiet again. Later, as the stars came out and the wind died down, Rosa sat beside the fire, Caleb tending her wound with steady hands. I'm sorry you had to see that, she said. I'm not, he replied. She looked over at him. What now? You decide. She stared into the flames for a long time. Then she said, I want to remember who I was, before all this. Then let's start tomorrow. She nodded, and for the first time in 10 years, Rosa Mercer fell asleep without a knife under her pillow. The dawn after the gunfight was unnaturally quiet. No birds sang, no coyotes howled, just wind moving over blood-soaked dust and broken fence rails. The sun had barely cracked over the distant mountains when Rosa stepped outside the cabin and looked at the place where Silas Crow had died. The earth was darker there, even after Caleb shoveled dirt over it. Still wet, still heavy. She didn't look away. Caleb came up beside her with a coffee mug in each hand. One offered without a word. She took it. Her fingers brushed his. They hadn't spoken much since the shooting. Some silences weren't awkward, they were sacred. "He won't be the last," she said finally, her voice low. Caleb sipped from his cup. "He was the loudest. I don't want to live my life looking over my shoulder." He glanced at her, eyes worn. "Then don't. That easy, huh?" "No," he said. "But it starts with a decision." Rosa walked slowly to the fence, where her bullet had torn through the rail the night before. She traced the splintered wood. "I never chose any of it, Caleb. Dusty picked me up when I didn't have shoes. I followed orders because if I didn't, men like Silas made examples out of girls like me. You don't know what that's like." "I don't," he admitted. She turned toward him. "I've done bad things. Things you don't come back from." He held her gaze. "Then don't go back. That's what matters." Rosa stared at him a long moment. Her lips parted like she might argue. But then, slowly, she nodded. Inside, she changed into clothes she hadn't worn in years. Plain linen blouse, a skirt that came just below the knees, no pistol strapped to her thigh, no knife in her boot. Caleb handed her an old hairbrush he'd found tucked in a box beneath their mother's things. She brushed her hair in the mirror with unsteady hands. "I look soft," she said. "You look like home," Caleb said from the doorway. She blinked fast, then turned away before he could see her cry again. They buried the 3 men from Silas's crew out past the North Ridge, marked with stones and nothing more. No crosses, no names, just a warning to whatever came next. That night, the cabin glowed warm with lantern light. Caleb made stew, and Rosa chopped onions with a real kitchen knife, not one sharpened for killing. The table was small, worn, but solid. It was the first real meal they'd shared since the night the ranch had burned 10 years ago. They didn't talk much while they ate, but when the bowls were empty and the fire cracked low in the hearth, Rosa finally said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to be now." Caleb didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Be whoever you would have been if none of this happened. That person's gone. Then make a new one. You're still here. That's what counts." The wind outside picked up. The shutters rattled, and somewhere in the rafters, a mouse scurried. Rosa tilted her head. "You hear that?" Caleb stood, tense. "Horse." They both moved to the window. A single rider approached, slow, deliberate, but the posture wasn't threatening. No weapon drawn, no extra dust cloud behind. Rosa tensed beside him, her hand drifting to where her pistol used to hang, but Caleb gently touched her wrist. "Wait." As the figure drew closer, Caleb's shoulders relaxed. "Preacher," he said. The old man on the saddle wore black, beard gray and wild, his Bible strapped to the pommel. He raised a hand in greeting as he approached. Caleb stepped out onto the porch. "You're far from town, Reverend." The man dismounted slowly, knees stiff. "Heard gunshots 2 nights ago. Sheriff didn't care to check. Figured someone should." Caleb nodded. "We had trouble. Took care of it." The preacher looked around, eyes narrowing. "This your place? Part of the old Mercer ranch?" The preacher raised a brow. "You the boy that used to run horses up this way? Caleb, right?" "That's me." The preacher stepped forward and clapped his shoulder. "Heard you were dead." "Almost," Caleb said. "But not quite." The old man looked past him toward the open door, where Rosa stood in the shadows. His expression shifted, recognition, confusion. "You got company?" Caleb turned. "Reverend, this is Rosa." The man froze. "Rosa Mercer?" She stepped out slowly, chin high. "I remember you." The preacher's face softened. "Girl, they buried an empty coffin for you. I wasn't in it." He looked like he wanted to weep and yell and fall to his knees all at once. Instead, he tipped his hat. "Well, I'll be damned." "No, sir," she said. "You won't." That made Caleb laugh for the first time in days. The preacher stayed the night. Shared stories about the town, about who had died, who had married, who had left. He told them how the church had half a roof now, how the sheriff drank more than he enforced, how the town doctor had gone blind but still diagnosed people by feel. When he left the next morning, he said something that sat heavy in the air. "You oughta come to town. Let folks see you. Let 'em know you're alive." Rosa didn't reply. Caleb watched her watching the horizon after the preacher rode away. "You thinking about it?" "I'm not ready," she said. "Not yet." He nodded. "When you are, I'll go with you." A week passed. Then two. They rebuilt the barn door, painted the porch rails. Caleb taught Rosa how to saddle a horse again, how to read the signs of rain by the smell of the dirt. She taught him how to mend seams with a proper stitch and how to tell if eggs were fresh just by shaking them. Slowly, the land remembered them, but Rosa still had nightmares. Caleb heard her through the wall. Low cries, gasps, the shuffle of sheets. Once, she screamed. When he ran to her room, she was sitting upright in bed, covered in sweat, staring at nothing. She didn't want to talk about it. He didn't press. One morning, she wasn't at breakfast. Caleb found her out by the graveyard they'd made. She stood over Silas's mound, hands in her pockets, a folded piece of paper in one hand. "What's that?" Caleb asked. "Debt," she said. "One I owed him, for the pain, for all of it. I was carrying it, even after he was dead." She knelt and placed the paper on the grave. "I'm not anymore." She stood, turned, and for the first time, Caleb saw peace in her eyes. Later that day, they packed a wagon with supplies. Caleb hooked up the horses. Rosa wore the quilt again, but beneath it, she wore a simple dress and boots that matched. They rode into town just before sunset. People stared, first at Caleb, then at her. Faces that hadn't seen them in years, some aged, some the same. Murmurs followed them like wind. "She's alive. That's Rosa Mercer. Didn't she die in the fire? She's with Caleb. Must be true." They stopped in front of the general store. Rosa stepped down slowly. Her hands shook, but she held her head high. The store owner, a middle-aged woman with a worn apron and soft eyes, stepped forward. "Rosa." "Yes, ma'am." The woman wrapped her in a hug before she could say anything else. Rosa froze, then melted into it. "You're home now," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're safe." Others came, some with cautious eyes, some with tears, some with tentative hands on her shoulder. But no one yelled. No one turned her away. By sundown, she sat on the porch of the saloon, drinking sweet tea with Caleb beside her. "I didn't think it'd feel like this," she said. "Like what?" "Like I belong here. You always did." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You think they'll forget what I was? They'll remember what you are." "And what's that?" He smiled. "Rosa Mercer, my sister, and the toughest damn woman this side of the desert." She laughed, a sound that made him close his eyes with quiet relief. As the sky turned purple and gold and the town lights flickered to life, Rosa watched the people move. Shopkeepers, farmhands, old church ladies. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was here. She was whole. For the first time in 10 years, the night didn't feel like a threat. Felt like a promise. And when a little girl passed by, clutching her mother's hand, she looked up at Rosa and smiled. Rosa smiled back. She didn't have to say a word. The desert had taken everything from her once. But now it was giving something back. Not just a place to stay, a name, a future. And when Rosa stood the next morning and looked out at the land that had burned her and buried her and, finally, brought her home, she whispered to herself like a vow, "I remember who I am now." If this story stirred something in your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more powerful Wild West stories just like this. Got a tale you'd like to hear next? Drop it in the comments below. This has been Tales of the Wild West, where every story is written in dust, blood, and redemption. We'll see you down the trail.